So thank you, Kai, for that welcome. And I too would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the land, or rather on top of the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respect to their elders past and present. And I also pay my respect to Aboriginal people who are present here today. And I want to say how much I enjoyed the welcome that we had this morning. I always find it fascinating to hear. We all had different life experiences. So Perry, I think his name is Perry, spoke very openly about his experiences, and his experiences are similar to many experiences that we see for people with disability in Australia in terms of oppression, disadvantage, and misunderstanding of cultural needs. I want to talk to you briefly, just very quickly, about Jenny. So I'm based at the Australian Human Rights Commission, and we have a complaint handling process. I'm independent of the complaint handling process. However, I meet regularly with the complaint team to see what kind of complaints are coming through, what are the trends. For the last 5 years, consistently, complaints under the Disability Discrimination Act have been the highest of all the number of complaints that we receive at the Commission, hovering around just under 40%. So 40% of all the complaints we receive are relating to disability discrimination. And of those complaints, roughly about 10% relate to education. And so last year we received a complaint from, and I'm going to call her Jenny. Jenny had a number of medical conditions, including right arm polio, that restrict movement of her arm and shoulders and cause her pain. Jenny was studying occupational therapy, and one of her subjects required her to complete a placement at a hospital, and I'm sure this is familiar to many of you, this scenario is familiar. Jenny claimed that staff from the hospital and the university told her that she was not suited to occupational therapy because of her disability, and that her supervisor communicated with her in an inappropriate manner. She claimed that the university and hospital failed to provide her with reasonable adjustment to enable her to successfully complete her placement, and she said that she withdrew from the placement before a final grade was issued. When the complaint was received, both at the Commission, both the university and the hospital indicated a willingness to try to resolve the matter by conciliation. And that is the role of the Human Rights Commission, is to play a neutral, unbiased role in attempting to conciliate between the parties. The complaint was resolved within 7 weeks of being lodged with the Commission. The university agreed to arrange a new placement at a different hospital, to provide additional negotiated reasonable adjustment for the placement based on medical information from Jenny, and to record a temporary incomplete grade until Jenny had completed the placement. The hospital apologised for Jenny's negative experience during the placement and indicated that steps had been taken to develop a disability action plan for staff, students and volunteers. And I wish I could say that this kind of scenario happens every day, but sadly it doesn't. And that's why I'm delighted to be here with you today, because it is an incredibly important issue. It's not just about education, but it's about preparing students and others for work, for making contributions to society, for becoming useful citizens of society. So we all know that a good education leads to increased opportunities in employment, society, politics, the list goes on. So when I hear of scenarios like Jenny, it makes me feel hopeful. But sadly, as I've witnessed today from the conversation, we still have a long way to go. And I think it's important to think about what role can you play individually, but also you operate within systems and policies and procedures that have often been around for literally hundreds of years. So my job is to challenge those assumptions, to challenge those systems. So I'm hoping that by the end of today, you will have some way of looking at your own role and then, of course, moving forward. I also want to tell you just briefly what I've heard. I've been in the role now for almost 11 months. So I went all around Australia when I first started. But I felt it was important because there hadn't been a full-time Disability Discrimination Commissioner for a few years. And I know many of you are familiar with Graham Innes, who is my full-time predecessor. I thought it was important to check in with the disability community and find out what were the major issues. And unsurprisingly, education came up in every consultation. Just quickly, my 6 priority areas based on my consultation are employment, education, housing, criminal justice system, NDIS. I've gone for 4 minutes without saying the NDIS. That must be some sort of record. And the issue of violence against people with disabilities, and I know a lot of you are familiar with all those 6 issues. Of course, there are many others: access to health, access to public transport, access to goods and services, the list goes on. Education came up consistently. People told me about obviously we've got primary, secondary and tertiary education sectors, and I heard a lot mostly about primary and secondary, but I did hear a lot about people with disabilities experiences in tertiary education. They told me that there will be no change for students or positive change until there are systemic changes. And we've been talking a lot about the system today. And, it's important to think of the person with a disability and what do they need to have a positive and constructive environment in which to fulfill their learning needs. And I also heard, and I've experienced this myself, a culture of low expectation about students being able to succeed. I remember I was probably 13 or 14 and I decided I wanted to do law. I wasn't quite sure what I had in mind about being a lawyer, whether it was practicing law or doing research or going into government. That wasn't clear. But I remember a well-meaning old family friend said to me, forget it. You're not going to be able to go into a courtroom and be able to hear all the arguments that are going on, including non-verbal, the way people speak and the way witnesses present evidence. So I remember thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't do law. But I also remember thinking there's got to be a lot more than just practicing law. And when I I graduated from university and I worked for a judge for a year, and he brought out a survey of last year's law graduates, and it said that 51% of law graduates were not practicing law. So the evidence is clear. Not everyone goes into being a solicitor or a barrister. There's a whole range of other things that you can do. Disability Discrimination Commissioner. If you had told me when I was a young graduate that I would be doing this, I would have probably just thought that was beyond the realms of impossibility. But I was given opportunities. Yes, I had a lot of challenges, a lot of assumptions made about me, and also the culture of low expectation. So that's something that we need to think about, and it's your role to think about how you can challenge that, and I'll get to that shortly. I also heard that resources are an issue, lack of resources in particular, culture and practices. We can have the most fantastic disability inclusion plans, the most fantastic policies and procedures, the most fantastic laws, but we are not seeing them translated into reality. And we heard from Matt earlier who mentioned, among other things, the amount of funding that goes towards supporting students with disability, 0.03%. And what I heard was, often when funding is allocated, particularly for primary or secondary students, the funding disappears. A student might be allocated a 5-day-week support worker in the school. They might only get 3 out of 5 days, and the rest is used for funding the library, for admin workers, for canteens, the list goes on. So this is something that parents are very frustrated about. I also heard universities. they're not accessible, and we are hearing a lot today about how they can be more accessible, but there is still not a lot of significant issues. There are 39 universities, and I'm actually delighted to see that 24 out of 39 are represented. I think that demonstrates an incredible amount of enthusiasm, willingness, and commitment to trying to move forward. I've heard from people that you've been talking about this for a long time, and I think it's important that at some point someone has to take responsibility. I see a lot of buck passing, and I know the challenges for you working in university. And I should disclose, I'm married to an academic. I'm actually married to a medical professional. You can imagine the conversations that go on between the medical model of disability and the social model of disability. So I understand, for example, doctors are trained to fix people. I understand that the whole approach to education is about fixing people, making people feel better, making people live longer, the list goes on. So I understand the challenges that you're up against between, and again, Matt talked about that triangle between government, market, and university. And Adelaide University, where I first started my academic studies, I went to the Disability Support Officer. I mean, I come from an environment of primary and secondary school where I'd had a pretty inclusive education. And I thought that was the norm. Of course, what a cold, hard shock I got as a 17-year-old to assume that the university would just provide me with note-taking, teachers of the deaf, anything else that I needed to be able to navigate my university. I was told by the Disability Support Officer at the time to record the lecture, take them home, and just listen repeatedly until I thought I could hear what was being said. Or maybe your mother, assuming, maybe your mother could write down the notes from the recording. Interesting how he, and I must say, that he assumed that the woman of the house would be willing to sit through that time. So we've come a long way. I started university about 4 years before the Disability Discrimination Act, so I just told you how old I am. So I was at a time when still disability rights was still emerging in Australia. So yes, we've come a long way, but we still have much to do, particularly, and I want to reinforce this again and again, challenging the systems that are in place. Even the whole concept of inherent requirements is, I have to say, based on many assumptions and myths and prejudice that people develop over years because of their lack of understanding or lack of empathy and support, wanting to support people with disability. Doctors think that there's and I must apologise to all the doctors in the room, doctors feel that there's only one way of communicating. I remember my cousin who, when she finished, and she's 10 years older than me, she finished medicine at Adelaide University, and she was telling me of a colleague of hers in the class who was top of the class every year, won prize after prize after prize, and he was in her group on their very first day at the hospital round when they become interns. What did he do? He couldn't cope, and he ran off and hid in a broom cupboard. Now, I don't know what happened to him, but it made me realise how everyone is different, everyone clearly has potential, and that should be the starting point. It's like in criminal law, that concept, you are presumed innocent unless found guilty. I know that sounds a rather extreme analogy, but we should always presume people with disabilities have the capacity, the ability. So this is something I'm so pleased that you're coming together, because the reality is you work in universities where there's a lot of tradition, a lot of things that happen that have been always been like this. And that is my point. Every day I hear things like, oh, well, that's too hard. It's rather complex. No, it's too expensive. No, we've always done it like this. And it becomes part of, even many people with disabilities just accept that. I often hear them say, look, I know the problems are challenging. I think the answer is quite simple. It's others who make it challenging. Others who come up with a whole range of things on why we shouldn't do it. Let me start with OHS or WHS. I don't believe for a minute that OHS should trump disability rights. I think we need to look at it holistically. I think we need to look at it calmly, no panicking, don't overreact. And we need to look at the situation and say, well, if there is somebody who wants to do medicine and has cerebral palsy and they take a minute longer to communicate, I would rather have a high-quality doctor who can understand the medicine as opposed to somebody who can't even communicate, who can't even explain in real terms. I would rather have quality over quantity. So if it takes another minute for a doctor to explain what it means, then I think that's how it should be. And I want to acknowledge how we've got health professionals here in this room. I particularly want to acknowledge, for those of you who attended the Pathways Conference last year in Canberra, I couldn't go, but I've watched some of the videos, and I know there was a medical graduate called Dinesh from Gold Coast University. He's now practicing medicine. So I think you're coming up against a system where you would hear, and I'm sure you've heard this, too complicated, it's too hard, it's always been done like this. Well, 100 years ago, women couldn't even vote. So you need to think about what do we need to do to challenge. So where to from here? I asked people this when I went around Australia, what they thought was working, and I'm sure many of the solutions are familiar to you. Funding. And of course, funding being used appropriately to ensure that there are reasonable adjustments. I also just want to talk to you this is about another one of my bugbears. The bane of my existence under the Disability Discrimination Act are two words: unjustifiable hardship. There are just so many negative connotations in that I can't even, where do I start? So I was born with a disability, and for those who acquire a disability, are we a hardship on society? Or they're unjust to provide us with what should be justifiably our right? I didn't ask to be born deaf. I'm asking for things to be given in a way, things to be given to me in a way that make it accessible. I'm not asking for extra rights. I'm not asking for special rights. I'm asking for example, interpretive and real-time captioning. I'm not getting any more or any less than you. So that's an argument I've seen constantly, and I've seen that often in academia. Oh, why did the deaf kid get a special hearing aid, or why did he get a special, FM system? Well, because I can't hear what's going on. So I think it's really important. Your job is to challenge long-held assumptions. I want to apologise to all the academics in the room. I'm not attacking academics. I'm just saying that often I hear it's too hard, it's too complex. Oh, we've always done it like this. So you have to think, well, we could use arguments like, women not having the right to vote, or black people and white people not being able to marry up into the 1950s in the US, and so forth. So I think it's important. You have a critical role to play too with people with disabilities. Too often we are left out of decision making or about discussions about things that affect us directly. So you have a real opportunity to be the ally, champion, and team colleague of people with disabilities. And I know that's a challenge. Look at the conversations I have at home. Doctor, lawyer. You can imagine how, lawyers are trained to be risk averse, and of course that's another problem in itself. We are trained to see the worst in things, so we need to teach ourselves to be more open to what might happen if we just try something else. People also told me what is working well is when things are provided in accessible format, and this is where technology plays a fantastic role. Technology is a great enabler. HTML means people are blind can now access most material. We still have some way to go. So it's not a long bow to draw to make things accessible, particularly since we use technology every day. One of the things that we struggle with, or I think is a challenge, is there's no real definition or clarity or guidance around reasonable adjustment. So I think that needs to be part of the conversation. It involves being a bit creative. It involves looking at best practice. It involves being, thinking outside the box. and I was pleased to hear from Marion. I'm just trying to work out where Marion is up there, talking about changing the language. I mean, never presume that I can't do anything until perhaps I might demonstrate that I can't. So talk about what is required, what is the path, and what is the outcome. I mean, I'm not practicing law. I never imagined, to be honest, I never imagined I would be a solicitor. I thought perhaps I'd do something else, research or advocacy or government. So it's important. What would be the learning outcome is to get a law degree and then adapt with that. I've run out of time, and as you can probably guess, I could talk all day or night about you. So in conclusion, again, I want to emphasise the incredibly critical role you play. I mean, we've heard that phrase, be the change you want to see. So for me, I want to see us all working together. I absolutely understand and appreciate you come from 24 different universities. Some have been around for a very long time, others are fairly new, some are innovative, some are maybe not so innovative. Some are still stuck in the 1800 model of education, perhaps. I won't name names, but there are still many academics who feel threatened. Well, why would you want to feel threatened if you have a potential Rhodes Scholar in your class, or could have a Rhodes Scholar in your class, or the next Stephen Hawking, or the next Frida Kahlo, Einstein, the list goes on. I had better stop talking there because I do want to hear from you. I'm sure you've got lots of questions or comments. Again, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I look forward to hearing more of the discussion this afternoon. And thank you also for the incredible work that you're doing. Thank you.
I'm happy for you to call on the questioners.
Well, I'm conscious that we need mics, so okay. So look, question, comment, chat. You want to challenge me in anything that I've said, or if you want me to clarify anything I've said, or talk more about the complaint process, whatever.
Hi, Alistair. I'm a doctor in a wheelchair, so we're not all troglodytes. I was going to ask you about the N-word, NDIS, and your thoughts about using sort of NDIS funding to improve participation in higher education with people with disabilities. Do you think we're on the right track?
That's a really, really good question, and it's obviously one that I've thought a lot about. I fundamentally believe that the NDIS is about creating the opportunity for people with disabilities to literally get out of their home, to be living independently, to be able to get out of their home and, of course, live in an accessible home and be able to choose where they live. However, I also, on the flip side, I believe that higher education institutions or educational workplaces, theatres, restaurants, the list goes on, they hold the responsibility of making sure that their services and buildings, etc., are accessible. So I don't believe that it's the role of the NDIS to be providing funding for all those, or the means to make them accessible. They certainly play a role in educating and demonstrating to mainstream services that they need to be accessible. But I think the danger for government that I see at the moment is they're investing a lot in the NDIS, that they're starting to invest less in accessible premises, accessible transport. In fact, Queensland has just ordered a whole set of brand new trains that apparently are not even accessible. So how is the NDIS supposed to solve all those other issues? So you raised a really good point, and my answer would be, I think it has to be continued to be a whole of government approach. But keep in mind, the NDIS is about creating independence, I believe, in getting out and about into the community.
Thanks for a fantastic presentation, Alistair. There doesn't appear to be much by the way of case law around complaints that have gone through DBA through the federal court in relation to higher education and disability. And you alluded to the prospect that many complaints are resolved and conciliated early in the process. And I just want to get a sense as to whether or not you've got any sense as to how extensive the complaints are that are getting conciliated, and the extent to which it's actually a bad thing to have an absence of case law in relation to disability in higher education.
And you raised that's a very good point, and I think there's a number of ways to respond to that. Firstly, people with disabilities don't have the resources to be able to pursue matters after it's conciliated because of the costs and the time and the need to have a very qualified advocate or lawyer to take on the case. Discrimination law, disability discrimination law is a very specialised area of law, so there's not many practicing in it. So what we see often is sometimes people will come back to the commission and say, the complainant will say the respondent is not following through with what they said they would do, and we have no way of being able to force that because it's an entirely voluntary process. So, and again, of course, remember in education, many people are young, so they're 18, 19, 20, so they may not have developed the confidence or the advocacy skills to be able to advocate for themselves. So that's what I've observed. I've also observed people have told me that they feel that the DDA, Disability Discrimination Act, could be much stronger in terms of having a compliance function, as well as making sure that it's easier for people with disabilities who are very vulnerable the opportunity to be able to pursue more strongly their claims. So that's just a quick response.
Thank you for coming to speak today, by the way. I quite enjoyed it. I'm mindful of the comment that was made this morning about how the Disability Discrimination Act is often quite neutral in the values that it may assert. I'm not sure if I've quite articulated that point very well, but I'm sort of thinking about a line I keep coming back to in the 2015 review of the Disability Standards for Education, which says reliance on people with disability or their associates to lodge complaints places the onus of action on the person with least power in the student-provider relationship. And I was wondering if you had any ideas on, especially as a lawyer and someone who's trained to see the worst in things, how, in 10 years' time, if things were better, what would be the right step? Where would we go? How would we do it? Have you got any ideas? How do we reduce reliance on complaints?
In the dream world, I'd like a model similar to what's in the United States, where they actually have in the Department of Justice a disability unit who actively pursue litigation where they see discrimination, particular systemic discrimination. So one of the most recent examples they did was that all cinemas in America now have to provide all screening to be accessible. I was in New York 2 weeks ago for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities conference. I thought I might just go along and watch a Broadway show. Didn't have any expectations that it would be captioned. I got there and there was a little device that they gave me and I went in and it was entirely accessible. So that happened every single night of seeing theatre shows. So that's because the United States structure, it may change with the current administration, where the Justice Department actively, under their legislation, pursue claims. We don't have anything like that in Australia, so that, to me that would be a big step in the right direction of literally seeing compliance with the law. And your comment also about the disempowerment of people with disabilities. I obviously have an arm, I mean I'm not involved in, as I said, in complaints, but I often hear of people who have made a complaint, which is one of them, and the respondent will bring in a whole army of lawyers and the CEO and the very adversarial circumstances or environment, and they just can't even begin the conversation of maybe, can we actually just talk about it? So they're my two comments. In a dream world, I would have compliance functions, or the government would set up a stronger compliance function, and I think we need to see respondents become more open to just talking about the issue in a non-adversarial way. I think of
One more question.
one more
There is one.
question.
There is one.
One here.
Thank you, Alistair. This probably leads on from the last question. I think the thing that worries us as a sector the most about inherent requirements is if they're developed in a way that's discriminatory. Do you have any comments about how we might avoid that, or what are the things that we need to ensure that they're not discriminatory?
Well, I'll start off by saying, look, I don't have a fixed view to what Captain was asking earlier, yes or no. I know it's important that universities prepare people ready for employment, and of course that's an ongoing conversation you've got to have with the registration body. Language is critical. I mean, there is so much ableism. I'm sure many of you have heard of that phrase, ableism, where the language or the structure is such that they automatically disempower a person with a disability. So if I could reinforce my example of the requirement to be able to communicate. So if someone has a speech device, an augmented speech machine, they should communicate differently. And I know that's challenging to many people in profession who automatically assume that it will take longer, that it won't be of the same quality as a person who doesn't have such a device. So I think a starting point would be, if you are developing inherent requirements, is to think about the language. And also, and the point that was made earlier in one of the presentations, what do we want here? What's the outcome? So I think I've thought a lot about this, and I've certainly seen a lot of inherent requirements that are based on, things where people just assume it should always be this way. On a side note, the South Australian government has a disability justice plan. It's now in its third year of operation. They've already amended their Evidence Act to acknowledge that people who are vulnerable, in particular people with disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities or speech impairment, need to give evidence in a different way. So that's a really good step in the right direction of looking at the law itself and then amending it to make it recognise that people communicate in different ways. And maybe in the closing comment, we've seen in the last week comments made in Parliament that certainly don't help what we're trying to do here. A parliamentarian advocating for the inclusion of children with disabilities, although she talked specifically about autism, about getting rid of them. And that doesn't help. That certainly doesn't help our cause when we want to talk to academics about the importance of inclusion. So I think starting with the language, as well as, and this is a difficult job for all of you, it's challenging academics who they know their particular area of expertise brilliantly, but how do you translate that into lived experience? And so thank you. So I think on that note, we'll bring that to a close. So thank you again for all the work you're doing, and I look forward to ongoing discussion.